Hello guys, it's me again with another motorvlog. Now today I am doing my motorvlog in a car. And a few people, yes, that's right, I am doing this motorvlog in the Cage's preferred means of transport, a car. A few motorvloggers on YouTube have done a motorvlog in a car, and so I thought, why not give it a go? So this is going to be the Christian motorvlog, probably the first Christian motorvlog done in a car. And what I thought I'd talk about is loving your enemies, which is talked about in the Sermon on the Mount. I'm going to talk about, I'm going to call this video Love Thy Cager, because, the word cager is a derogatory term used by motorcyclists and cyclists for car drivers who feel comfortable in their cage and have disregard for other road users. Well, it's very easy to jump into a car and just, it's just one of those things you just use day in, day out. In fact, a lot of us motorcyclists have probably learnt to drive a car before we've learnt to ride a motorcycle. Probably not so back in the 1960s and 70s, but these days, we're also car drivers as well. So, Sermon on the Mount. Now, yes, loving your enemies. Interesting subject, that. I mean, it's covered in other religions like Buddhism and Taoism and all that when I was researching the subject. But I'm a Christian, so I'm going to talk about it from the Christian point of view. Now, Sermon on the Mount. Jesus talks about loving your enemies. In chapter 5, verse 44 in Matthew, also in Romans 6, 27 to 28. It says, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Because at the time it was like the Jews at the time were persecuted by the Romans, and so it was like love your neighbour, hate your enemies sort of deal. And then Jesus comes across with this love your enemies. He says, but I tell you this, love your enemies. Easier said than done is what I can say. I mean, it's so easy to hate, isn't it? It's somebody at work, some former friend, lover, whatever, spouse, and we fall out and we just hate them. And it's so easy to build that rage up and do badness. Well, it's quite interesting. When I was researching this, I came across a lot of Martin Luther King. And he had some interesting things to say about love and hate. He said that the only way to make friends with your enemy is love. He said, the darkness cannot be fought with darkness, can only be fought with light. So hatred cannot be fought with hatred, it has to be fought with love. Very sort of influential character, Martin Luther King. Quite like him. But, we live, all the awful things happen in this world, hatred and war and stuff. It's just a sign of our sinful world. It's a sign of us hating each other, sadly. And this is not what Christ's, not the Lord's intention. The Lord doesn't hate us. He loves us. That's why he sent his Son as a sacrifice for our sins, for our atonement. That's what a lot of us always forget when we look at all these different things. So why should we hate others? I mean, it reminds me of the story. I can't remember the verse, but where the guy owes a debt to his employer, and his employer redeems the debt, and then somebody owes him some very small amount, and he doesn't redeem it, so his employer says, well, why didn't you? And actually he built a gallows for him to be hung and his employer said, well, you've built these gallows, okay, I'll hang you. I'll put the verse in the description. I vaguely remember at the top of my head. It's quite an interesting story. But anyway, back to where we were. Yeah. So Martin Luther King said, hate is a burden. I mean, yeah, hate's easy to get into. Hate is a burden. I prefer love. And he's got a point, hasn't he? But it's, you know, you feel sort of anguish towards your enemy. But something else that's mentioned in Proverbs 21 to 22 and Romans 14 to 21 talks about doing good to your enemies, treating them when they fall and when they're hungry, feeding them, or when they're thirsty, giving them something to drink, is like heaping hot coals onto their head. It talks about making them feel shameful. They've done these hurtful things to you, but you do good to them, and you'll make them feel ashamed. And that's the thing about it. That's the good thing about love. Hate really doesn't have a place. Hate brings on war. Hate brings on fighting. Hate can actually make you physically ill. If you hate somebody, I can talk about this from personal experience. I'm not going to go into details, but I have hated somebody for a very long time. Lost contact with them, actually, but really, it just made me physically ill. You know, they did something not very pleasant to me, and I hated them, and it made me feel ill. You know, really, guys, don't get into hate. It causes so much problems. Love is the way forward. And, you know, yeah, it's hard. It's hard to do, but in the long run, it's less of a burden. Thanks, guys.